Good evening, everyone again. I'm very pleased to see everyone again tonight. And I welcome you to the Co-Cathedral, St. John, Velazquez. And tonight is the fifth session of our reflection on Lent and the event of Easter through classical art. The three works of art which we will explore in detail tonight will complete Christ's Passion. I will begin with two paintings and then conclude with Michelangelo's Pietà, a marble sculpture from St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. Before we look at our two paintings, I thought it is a good opportunity to review the uses of marble art in art. Sculptures have provided inspiration for many great paintings. Marble has been equally used for many objects, such as shrines, fountains, fireplaces, friezes, relief sculptures, as well as freestanding statues. A marble frieze, as you can see on the left, this is kind of a marble frieze, but it's a relief. So first, the marble frieze is a sculptured or richly ornated band of marble, which you usually find on top of a building or on decorative objects. It can also be relief sculptures, and that's what we see on the left. And they are characterized by the projection of the design from the surface. However, it still belongs to the background. Relief sculptures can be seen from only one vantage point. This is different to freestanding sculptures, which are finished on all sides and can be experienced from different angles. As you can see here on the right, up over there. It is, to use the German word raumgreifend, so therefore it's translated to take hold or to intrude into a space. In fact, even since the invention of metal tools during the Bronze Age, allowing artists to shape the marble, marble stone has been highly prized by sculptors and architects alike. Its translucency and durability has made it the medium of choice for all the greatest sculptors during Greek and Roman times, as well as their successors in the Renaissance and later, all the way up to today, such as Donatello, Michelangelo, Bernini, Canova, and Rodin, just to mention a few. Here are 4 examples which I will show of marble sculptures over the ages. For example, the Parthenon reliefs, which were created between 446 to 430 BC. And so that's the relief of stone. So it's part of it, and you can have different, there's low relief or high relief, depending on how far the motif kind of comes out of the marble itself. Then you have the Apollo Belvedere, which was created in 330 BC. Another example is David by Michelangelo, 1501 to 1504. And then one of my favorite marble sculptures, the 3 Graces by Canova, which were created in 1815 to 1817. Sculptors preferred marble because while relatively soft and easy to work with when it was first poured, it became extremely hard and dense with age. Marble is also available in a variety of shades and patterns. White marble are especially prized for fine art sculptures, and that's based on 3 key properties. The first property is isotrophy, which means that the marble, the block, will exhibit the same stress resistance, strength, and hardness throughout, which makes it very important for the sculptor while they're working on it so they can use the same force as they're chipping away on a piece of marble block. The second property is homogeneity. This relates to the consistency of color throughout the marble block without spots or dark veins, which we sometimes see. And interestingly, these days, we actually like the veining and the veins going through it and creating interesting patterns. They're quite fashionable for contemporary use. The third property is resistance to shattering. In addition, the low refractory index of marble permits light to penetrate into the stone, as it does into human skin, resulting in a typical waxy look, which gives stone a human appearance. Particularly when highly polished, marble could be transformed to imitate human flesh. I think the 3 Graces are a wonderful example of this. The high polish on the stone makes it looks like human flesh. During the Renaissance, Michelangelo, who we'll talk about in more detail later, famously described marble sculpture as the slow release of a form as it emerged out of the block. He said it was his role as an artist to liberate the human form trapped inside the block by gradually chipping away at the marble surface. And here I've zoomed into the face of David, and he certainly was a master in working away, chipping away, and bringing out the human form that was in the marble block. It is worth remembering that most original Greek bronzes were melted down or lost. But fortunately, Romans made numerous marble copies of many of the Greek bronzes. As a result, Greek and Roman sculpture became strongly associated with marble, which was another reason why Renaissance artists fired with the desire to rejuvenate the art of classical antiquity, preferred marble to ordinary stone. Sculptures were in a position to have tangible examples of classical Greek and Roman sculptures available to them in the form of ruins and excavated sculptures. Let us look at one such example, the statue of Velazquez and his sons, which was created between 27 BC and 68 AD. Which was excavated in Rome in 1506 and placed on public display in the Vatican Museum. The figures are near life size, and the group is a little over 6 feet in height, showing the Trojan priest Velazquez and his sons being attacked by sea serpents. The group has been called the prototypical icon of human agony in Western art. However, unlike the agony often depicted in Christian art, showing the passion of Jesus and martyrs, Velazquez's suffering has no redemption power or reward. The suffering is shown through the contorted expression of the faces, which are matched by the struggling bodies, especially of Velazquez himself, with every part of his body strained. And again, I pulled out the face so we can see the details a little better. Again, the agony is written upon his face. As I mentioned earlier, many pictorial artists spend time studying ancient sculptures, from which they prepared drawings. These drawings served as inspiration for figures in their own compositions. We have an example of this in our first painting of the evening, the Elevation of the Cross by Peter Paul Rubens. Peter Paul Rubens was born in 1577 in Siegen in Germany and died in 1640 in Antwerp, Belgium. Rubens was a Flemish artist as well as a diplomat and is considered the most influential artist of the Flemish Baroque tradition. Rubens himself spent 8 years from 1600 to 1608 in Italy. He had seen, besides many other ancient sculptures, the recently rediscovered Velazquez sculpture, and on his return to Antwerp, combined Italian influences with the lucidity of Flemish art. Rubens' unique and immensely popular Baroque style emphasized movement, color, and sensuality, which followed the immediate dramatic artistic style promoted in the Counter-Reformation, which we touched on 2 weeks ago. Rubens was a painter producing altarpieces, portraits, landscape, and historic paintings. He was also a prolific designer of cartoons for the Flemish tapestry workshops. Overall, more than 1,400 works of art have been attributed to him. In addition to running a large workshop in Antwerp that produced paintings popular with nobility and art collectors throughout Europe, Rubens was a classically educated humanist scholar and diplomat who was knighted by both Philip IV of Spain and Charles I of England. He was one of the last major artists to make consistent use of wooden panels as support medium, even for very large works of art, particularly for this one. But he also started using canvases, especially when the work needed to be sent a long distance. The painting, The Elevation of the Cross, which was commissioned for the Church of St. Wolkoga in Antwerp is a triptych. It is painted on 3 wooden panels that are hinged, allowing it to be open and closed. So we have one panel here to the side, the central panel, and one to the right. This triptych is of enormous size. Together with the side panels, it measures 21 by 15 feet. Triptychs were common in the Middle Ages, but were rather outdated in the beginning of the 17th century. Therefore, Rubens had chosen to make a few changes to the overall style to kind of update it a little bit. So instead of depicting related but independent scenes on the side panels, usually we would see saints or the patron on the side panels, Rubens continued the action of the central section onto the sides, clearly visible by the landscape and the sky floating into the side panels. So this big oak tree kind of flows into to the right side, to your left, and then the sky continues onto this side. So it's one continuous painting. So now let us focus on the painting while I read a sentence from Luke 23:34. Then Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." With this, I would like to kind of turn it over to the audience and help me to explore this painting. We have one, if someone just could raise a hand, because then we can bring over the microphone. It's just easy for everyone to hear. So I opened the discussion with a very open question: what do we see and what does it mean? Does anyone would like to start commenting on the painting?
I'll start. You can see on the right, it looks like they're they're working on crucifying the 2 thieves. And the left aspect of the triptych seems like it's mostly women.
So this is actually John.
Right, John.
With Mary.
And it definitely looks like they're putting a lot of effort into getting Jesus upright. Like this is a monumental task that requires a lot of strong people. So it's interesting to look at. It doesn't seem like it's a very practical way to crucify someone, but it's a beautiful painting.
Yeah. Yes, very exactly. So if I just pick up on a few elements you pointed out, if you start to go over to your left, which we think is Christ's right, so the side of honor, and that's why his most beloved disciple John is there together with his mother. And we actually see also John is putting his right hand on top of Mary's clasped hands. And there's a reference in Luke where Jesus basically hands over his mother to John and asks him to take care of her. She's the mother for them as well. So I think that's kind of the scene Rubens was interested in depicting on a little bit far from the left of ours. And then there's a group of 4 women down here, and there's 2 children there. And they all express very different emotions again. I've seen that in paintings before. Artists are very interested in showing all the human emotions that we can have through a situation like that. So there's fear, there's certainly kind of a shock. In this particular woman bending back, what's interesting with her gaze is locked on the face of Jesus. So which kind of helps us, it leads our gaze back to the middle section and back to the most important person, which is Christ. She also has a baby, and I thought that was an interesting addition. The baby, she was nursing the baby, but through the whole situation and what was going on, the baby was so stressed that it stopped nursing. And that's my impression here. So maybe it's a little bit of a play, because usually we would see the Virgin and the child. There's many, so maybe Rubens also wanted to lean into a depiction of that. And many paintings we see is the foreshadowing of Christ's death, even though it's depicted as a baby. So maybe that's the service in the face of the child. And then over here, yes, so we go now to Christ's left side, so your right side is where the other two thieves are being prepared exactly. So one is already nailed to the cross, and it's extreme foreshortening to be able to represent this. So that was Rubens showing off his technical skill doing that. The other thief is just being brought over. And then these are Roman soldiers who are doing the task, and they're emotionally not involved in at all. They're very brutal expressions on their faces. And then I will just point out one more thing, and I would like to open this up again to the group. I thought what was really interesting is we can see the sun and the moon depicted at the same time in the upper corner over here, foretelling the darkness that is about to set over the whole world for 3 hours as eclipse occurs during when Christ dies. So I thought that was very interesting.
You definitely have your diagonal on this one, since we're picking it up. And Christ's gaze appears to be upright, looking into the Father.
Right. They just when this was when the triptych was positioned in its original position in the church, it was actually a depiction of God above him. So, and that was kind of lined up. So Christ's gaze is meeting the gaze of the Father. And then, so just we were just mentioning briefly, but I think it's a very important part of the painting. There are 9 executioners, and as you pointed out, it seems an almost impossible job that needs to be done. So they have 9 executioners, and look at their muscles. I mean, they're like Hercules. And I think that comes back to the sculptures that Rubens had seen, very much modeling the man, and even Christ himself, on Roman sculptures that he had seen, rather very muscular physique. In like this one, this execution, he's pulling up. This one, he's heaving up. It's hard to see, there's even one bending underneath the cross and pushing with his whole back against the cross to try and pull it up. Just to point out 2 others, just for example, this figure over here, he's working hard on it, but I think he's kind of looking out underneath his arm, and he's looking right at us. And it's I think that's a medium to hold us, the viewer, into the painting as well. And he's almost like, what are we doing here? So to kind of raise the question, is this right? And then we have one figure he's in armor. And he's kind of half-hearted in job too. Right? I mean, he's not really invested in it. It feels he has been pulled into it to kind of help out. And his face is actually based on the face of Rubens himself. So we have seen that quite often throughout our different lectures, that artists sometimes tend to put themselves into the paintings. And just again, Rubens was very devout. And then again, to kind of raise the question, I'm doing this too. I'm helping to crucify Christ. Is that the right thing? So I think to let you over here.
You probably project. I'm wondering if the red color, the one figure, has anything particularly significant, because when I first looked at the painting, that's where my eye was drawn. To this figure right here. The red.
Oh, the red, yeah.
Yeah, bright red. Is there anything in the history of the painting or anything that would say that that's particularly significant, or is that just accidental on my part?
I haven't found anything particular about him. I think Rubens also tried to bring in different figures, not just the soldiers, or not just the really strong, muscular helpers, just so we all participated in the crucifixion.
I'm hogging the microphone here. Actually, I have a question for you. Did Rubens meet with Michelangelo in Italy when he was there? Certainly those figures of the 3 or 4 males there look a lot like Michelangelo's figures from the last Gabriel period, which I think was painted about the same time as this year.
Yeah. So, so Michelangelo lived. So he died in 1564. So yeah, potentially. Yep. They were all famous in their own rights. So I'm sure, I can just relate. For example, I did a lot of research in England with furniture makers, and they kind of formed a little bit of a club. And also, if visitors from France came over, there was certainly a community. So I can imagine that something like that also happened in cities in Rome, and particularly famous artists like that. Unless they were rivals, as we remember with Michelangelo and Raphael, they certainly wouldn't hang out together. But other than that, I'm sure they probably meet and talk. Yeah.
The center section, it's almost as if creation itself is resisting the order, the forces of creation are even resisting this. It's so obvious that they're struggling.
Yes, no, I know that is exactly, I think, an idea that Rubens tried to bring across. The sin that Christ has taken from humanity and the sin he's carrying for us is so crushing and so heavy that even for 9 fully grown muscular men, it is an almost impossible task to put Christ, to fulfill and to kill him. Yes, yeah, I think that very much is central central message of Rubens' painting. Yes. Yeah, I think this is very much all components. Just kind of there's a dog down here, and that is very much in alignment with the traditional kind of Raphael, the Passion. There's in Psalm 22, the suffering servant, they speak about that dogs will be part of the crucifixion. So again, I think Rubens wanted to show that he was had good knowledge about the biblical story. And then just there's also, I mentioned earlier, the tree in the background, which is very prominent. It's an old oak tree. We touched on this last week with the tree of life. And I think Rubens kind of was thinking of that as well. But then obviously, once Christ has been resurrected, the cross itself becomes the tree of life.
Can I ask one more question? Of course. I read that the timing of this painting coincided sort of with the Council of Trent, and that the Council of Trent influenced this painting. And the Council of Trent was held in response to the Protestant Reformation. But I'm not really sure what is in this painting that would be indicative of being influenced by Trent. I don't know if you know the answer to that.
Yeah. A couple of things that come to mind that Council of Trent wanted to, or asked artists to implement into their painting was, for example, the depiction of Mary. First of all, she was supposed to be represented often. And when artists chose to represent her, they were supposed to represent her grieving and mourning, but still steadfast and trusting in her belief and in her faith in that God that she was part of the plan and she would live through this with grace. The other ideas that Trent asked artists to bring through was just to be clear with paintings, as we do now. A lay person should be able, once they've spent a little bit of time with the painting, to really try to pull these elements out as they have heard readings from in church from the Bible. So they should be able to recognize the moon and the sun, that it leads to the darkness and things like that. So I think that was very important, important part of the concept. So I think it's a beautiful painting, and I think we might want to move on to this unless there's any other questions. So one question that I put again on your handout as well that I was contemplating about was, and I'm not giving the answer, with whom do I associate with this painting? So who are we? We have a couple of choices.
By the way, you mentioned that the artist put himself in there as someone that was like assisting in the crucifixion, and that reminded me of the fact that if you watch The Passion of the Christ, there's a scene where all you see is forearms and a hammer, and Mel Gibson, those are actually Mel Gibson's arms. He's not in the movie, but he wanted to show that I participated in this as well. So in both cases, the artist is sort of doing the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. or this was we did have the executioner I was mentioning earlier, kind of looking out and kind of looking at us. The second painting of the evening is the Crucified Christ by Diego Velazquez. Diego Velazquez was born in 1599 in Seville, in southern Spain. At that time, Seville was an important city with a thriving artistic community. During his early years in Seville, Velazquez produced traditional religious works such as the Immaculate Conception, St. John the Evangelist on Patmos, and paintings of everyday life, or so-called tavern scenes. Occasionally, and more unusually, he actually combined the two. For example, his depiction of Christ in the house of Martha and Mary is mostly a kitchen scene, but on the back wall we can see there's a hatch, and if we look through it, we can see that Christ is addressing Mary. In 1623, King Philip IV appointed Velazquez as one of his court painters, and in 1658, 2 years before his death, Velazquez was made a Knight of Santiago. Velazquez and Rubens were contemporary, and they actually knew each other quite well. Rubens had spent 6 months at the court of King Philip IV as on a diplomatic mission. And they also had provided, both of them had provided, not Velazquez anyway, but also Rubens had provided work for the court. As many other artists, Velazquez also had the opportunity to visit Italy and study Italian works of art. The National Gallery's Christ condemned by the Christians, contemplated by the Christian soul, and our current painting, Crucified Christ, were painted shortly after his return from Italy in 1631 to 32. Its loosely painted technique shows a distinctly Venetian influence. And now I would like to read again a brief reading from John 19, 33, 34. But when they came to Jesus and saw that he was already dead, they did not break his legs. Instead, one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and at once blood and water came out. So my questions tonight with this particular work is, which is very different from the one we just saw. And thus the difference in depicting the suffering of Christ between those two paintings evoke a different response in us. And do we find the one or the other more inviting to contemplate Christ's suffering? I'm interested. What do you think about it?
I'm kind of surprised to say this, but it's almost tranquil, particularly compared to the other one, that maybe this is Christ has passed already, although maybe indicates otherwise, but it's a lot less, it's a violent thing to start with, but it's just not as action-oriented, if you will, than that.
Mm-hmm. But is that something, maybe in different situations and our personal mood, sometimes we prefer more like Rubens that really helps us to go through the story and to visualize Christ's suffering. Maybe on other days, something like this, which is very somber and serene, kind of helps us to contemplate. So maybe also different times ask for different depiction of it.
I don't know. Oh, it is on. Okay. So I think that this depiction is interesting because it allows for us to imagine more what could be happening with what happened before, whereas the other painting sort of tells us what happened before, and in that regards, I guess they both ask us to enter into the scene in different ways.
Yeah.
The background is entirely black, so there's nobody else in the painting. There isn't even a background of where it is. I also read on Wikipedia that the artist liked to paint nude models, and the body of Jesus was actually a nude model who posed for him, I think. So that's just an interesting artistic fact. But as Michelle said, you're kind of, I've seen this painting on the cover of a lot of books. It's very popularly used as a book cover, but it's almost like you're drawn into meditating on the death of Christ rather than the activities of crucifixion like the other painting did.
So with this one and the previous one, I noticed that there's a little bit of blood with the hands being out. But in general, his body's not bloody. And he's very pale. So I was just wondering if that's a common way of depicting, or was it the traditional way of depicting Jesus on the cross, or
The paleness of this.
right, without like many scars or signs of scourging.
Yeah.
So
Yes. I think mostly artists decided to keep the earlier suffering rather to a minimum. I think to help, rather to shock us, but to invite us to contemplate the suffering in a wider sense than so much the goreness of it. And I still haven't watched the movie, but I watched a little clip, and I thought that we were talking about the Passion, the movie by Mel Gibson. I'm like, oh wow. That definitely doesn't hold back in the movie so much. So I think certainly painters during the Renaissance and Baroque usually held back a little bit. Yeah. But the paleness, or representing Christ very pale and almost glowing, I think was their method to depict the fully human and the fully divine again. And it was a little bit of a way for them to try to bring this across. And also the beauty, in particular in this painting, I think the beauty of Christ. There's a part in a reading where it says that it's the absolute beauty. So Christ is the most beautiful man that has ever lived. So again, I think Velazquez was trying to represent the beauty of Christ. I think you have it.
When I look at this, there is a rather kind of a halo around the Captured Christ, and the darkness and contrast to the light and the darkness to me says a lot. Because in the Gospel of John, we have the contrast of light and darkness, and this would be, if in fact, as the gentleman said, that we see Christ as actually having died, or at the moment of death, that there is a moment of glorifying Christ that comes through that, because the Passion, St. John presented it, would see that light as the victory.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. And the lady in the back.
The darkness and the lack of anyone or anything else around just reminds me of the fact that we all have to make this journey from life to death alone. Nobody can accompany us in that particular moment. We have to do it ourselves.
Thank you. There's a few things I would like to point out in addition is Velazquez chose to depict the crucifixion using 4 nails. And throughout the centuries, there has always been a controversy between that. So in the Middle Ages, it was more common to use 4. The Renaissance artists started to use 3, which would be a reference to the Holy Trinity. So there's no, I don't think there's a right or wrong. It was what artists maybe have been exposed to before and what kind of their belief was going forward. And then, so yeah, just so there is, we can see the wound, and so Velazquez chose to depict a time frame after Christ had died, although he doesn't look like he had died or he had gone through great agony. One interesting fact that came across, and it was actually my husband pointed that out, since we are part of a wider medical community, I was thinking, how did Christ, or unfortunately, the Romans crucified many people, and what kind of death was that these humans experienced. And interestingly, in 1986, Dr. William Edwards from the Department of Pathology here at the Mayo Clinic, together with Pastor Wesley Gabriel from the Homestead United Methodist Church, they published a scientific communication exploring the physical death of Christ, and it was published in the Journal of American Medical Association, a journal. And they came to the conclusion that most humans, or Christ, eventually died, but it was primarily the hypovolemic shock and exhaustion asphyxia. That's the cause of death. Before we leave the painting, just pose a question that came to me: how can I become a better Christian? The last part of art we'll spend some time with tonight is Pietà by Michelangelo. The word pietà in Italian means pity or compassion, and is an important symbol in our Christian faith. The Pietà is made out of marble, which was mined from the Acrian Alps near Ferrara, in northern Italy, close to Florence. The Carrara quarries have provided precious, translucent white marble since antiquity. In 1497, a young Michelangelo, he was 23 at this point, was commissioned by the French Cardinal Jean de Villers to create, in quote, the most beautiful work of marble in Rome, one that no living artist could better. And it was dedicated for the Cardinal's future tomb in the old St. Peter's Basilica. And I guess few will argue that Michelangelo not only rose to the Cardinal's challenge with the Pietà, but also managed to surpass it. While this scene is not mentioned in the Bible, it was cited in the Middle Ages as one of the 7 sorrows of the Virgin. Its message is widespread and considered a symbol of suffering throughout the world. It portrays the sorrow of Mary as she holds the dead body of her son. Let me just read 2 sentences from the Gospel of John, John 13, 16 to 17. For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, so that everyone who believed in him may not perish, but may have eternal life. Indeed, God did not send the Son into the world to condemn the world, but in order that the world might be saved through him. One more time, I would like to invite everyone to share their thoughts and ideas with me, which this is my favorite part of my presentation, to hear what you all think about it, and wonderful thoughts.
I'll just say 2 quick things. First of all, Mary's body is abnormally large. That's something that struck me a long time ago. But I heard somebody say recently something that struck me, that on Good Friday, Mary was in her late 40s or close to 50. But Michelangelo did this sculpture with her having the face of a teenager. Why did he do that? I think the thought of scholars or art people is that he wanted to depict her holding, with the face of somebody holding like a newborn child. You probably have more thoughts about that, but it's interesting that her face looks so young compared to how it would have looked at the time.
Yeah. Really.
I have a lot of thoughts about this because I've seen it many times. But what impresses me is how Michelangelo used the volume of fabric and the weight of it to portray the grief, the intensity of the grief that she was feeling, and just all this fabric and moose of it. I can't go without my hands. But I wonder what the significance of her left hand. It's just, is it over? I think we could probably think of quite a few things that is significant of that, here it is.
Right.
But the weight, because I'm thinking of her as a small woman, and they were back then, and here's all this and I just think it's his way of portraying the depth of her grief.
Yes, I'm just going to pick up on a few comments and expand on them, which are all exactly right. So there is a disproportion between Christ and Mary, and that was more a technical problem for Michelangelo to be able to have Mary cradle her grown-up son. So he had to kind of disproportion the two figures. But he chose to keep her face in proportion. That makes sense. So keep the face in proportion, but then obviously starting to enlarge. And then he used exactly all this wonderful fabric to give her more volume to then accommodate her holding her son who had died. The youthfulness of the face has obviously been commented since it was unveiled, and it very much goes along the thoughts that Michelangelo believed that since Mary was pure, she was without sin, that a person like that would not age because she was close to divine and she was pure, so she wouldn't carry, because it's probably our sins and our wrongdoing and our worries that make us age, and Mary didn't have to carry this burden. Pointing out her left hand, exactly, so with her right hand she's just supporting the torso of Christ, and I have a few images where I zoomed in, but it's interesting, she doesn't touch Christ's skin, and that was interpreted as Christ was divine at this point, and she didn't want to interfere with this. So she doesn't touch him direct skin to skin. And then here, because I thought of this hand as well, she stretches out her left hand, and I'm sure there's multiple interpretations for that. I think it's very much, she's saying, she's offering Christ to the world. She's holding it, but she's also giving it away. It's here for you to take, for you to understand, to follow the suffering. I think she is accepting the death of Christ. So I think there's multiple ways to interpret the left hand. I found this in all of these pictures I found on the internet. I very much love this image, because if you have seen it if you were in Rome and have seen it in person, you never get this view. His head is bending back a little bit, so you can't actually see his face, and it's beautiful. Again, it's peaceful. One wouldn't think he had gone through all the suffering. He's almost sleeping, and I think that's why we use the expression, if someone dies, he has fallen asleep, and we will awake again in heaven with God our Father. One other thing that struck me when I saw it, when we were in Rome, is on this hand, and I mean, one is also, Michelangelo had decided to keep the wounds to a bare minimum. So this is where the nail had gone through. There's a tiny little bit where the spear had gone in, but it's very minimal. But when you're looking at the sculpture, his veins are still full. And to be able, I mean, I love sculptures and artists, what you could do with stone, to be able to work this out, to make sure that a vein just still is full of blood. So again, it hints to the notion that in our life, Jesus has died, but he hasn't died, he has fallen asleep. Those were, I thought, and it's a beautiful work of art, and I used a couple of words that I came across while I was doing the research. It's serene, infinitively sorrowful, exquisite, beautiful, heavenly. So those were all the words that we would read while studying, examining the sculpture. One interesting fact is the Pietà is the only work of art that Michelangelo ever signed. And the kind of story goes along that the Pietà was unveiled, and he kind of would kind of sneak in and stand in the back to hear what visitors would say about it. And he overheard people talking, and they were like, "Oh, I'm not sure we did this, and it might have been a couple of people from Venice," and so the story goes that he was rather upset about that because he obviously was very fond of this and very proud of his work. At one night he stayed behind and was locked into the basilica, and during the night he chiseled his name into the sash that goes across Mary's chest, and he's a Michelangelo of Florence made this. But then afterwards he regretted that he did it, and he vowed never to sign any of his works again. Because again, he was very devout, and so I think later he was upset that he regretted that.
I'm sure we can look it up, but do you know how long it took him to do this piece of art?
Probably less than 2 years.
Oh.
Yes. So it's not exactly clear, but it was because just by the time it was unveiled, and we know roughly when the cardinal had approached him, so it was less than 2 years.
Is it true that up until the 20th century, the public could actually touch the statue, but then somebody attacked it, and now you have to look at it from a distance because of that?
Yes, yeah. Someone, I forgot his name, he was unfortunately mentally disturbed, and he had like a hat or something, and he climbed onto the pieta and damaged it severely. The arm was damaged, some of the nose was damaged, an eyelid. And it took a couple of minutes for someone, first of all, to realize what was happening, and then for someone to kind of go after him and take him off. And it took 10 months to do the restorations on the work. And supposedly the most difficult one was to recreate one of the islands of the Pieta. It's just kind of running out of time. One quick thing, if people want to hold on, I would like to, for 1 minute, circle back to the painting last week, the Project Build Sun, and we talked about the two hands, the hand of the Father and the hand of the Mother. Now, I was resting on the Project Build Sun, and I personally thought, yes, it's God the Father who looks after us and who we pray to, but at the end of the day, it is the bond of the Father and the Mother that for us, mankind, is so important to help us to live a fulfilled life. So I thought that was, particularly with this image in mind, the Virgin Mary was so important to Jesus, to also probably to go through the Passion. So it is both. It is we all need our mothers and fathers. And with my last question, I will end our session today. How can I help my loved ones to bear their suffering? Thank you very much.